Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for the Cuff of the Sun Savage. This encounter relies on high damage and an insane amount of mechanic awareness, and you may find yourself often swindled out of a win. But fear not, friends, because following this guide will lead you to a success. A success. My name is Ms. Tech and I'll be your raid guide. On Savage mode, the main difference is that all 4 mini-bosses are considered one encounter. This means that they share a hard enrage timer of 10.5 minutes, and if you wipe on any of the bosses, you'll reset the encounter, starting from the very beginning. Any player that dies also cannot release until either the group has wiped or they are raised. The first mini-boss, Blaster, will place a magic vulnerability stacking debuff on the main tank throughout the encounter. Since the boss's direct attacks are purely physical, a tank swap is not necessary. However, this does mean this tank cannot handle any magic damage from any source for the duration of the debuff. The first ability is Mind Blast. If allowed to cast, this will place a confusion debuff on all players and will probably lead to a wipe. This must be interrupted at all costs. Assign a player and backups for all of these casts. Throughout the encounter, Blaster will throw out 4 mines in a random pattern over the platform. The 2 red mines will remain visible until they expire. Standing in these will do high damage, knockback, and apply paralyze on anyone hit. The location of the other 2 mines are only telegraphed by these blue circles for a short time during the cast, after which they are rendered invisible. These invisible mines will explode after 10 seconds, do massive damage, and probably lead to a wipe. To avoid this, the off-tank needs to pop these before they explode. These do a fair amount of magic damage, so the off-tank will have to coordinate cooldowns for each set of mines since the main tank will not be able to help with this duty. Immediately after the mine locations are telegraphed, 4 players will also be marked for mirages. These mirages will eventually drop down on their players, turn to a random player, and then dash across the platform in that direction. Since we want as much room as possible to handle mirages, we keep Blaster in the center of the room until the mines drop, then pull him and reposition in the widest safe spot. Mirages will splash damage as they drop on their players, so affected players need to spread to avoid overlapping. Dealing with mirages can be done in one of 2 ways. The first is the free-for-all, which involves having the mirages drop wherever and everyone else using their eyes to dodge as necessary. The second involves dropping the mirages in a line and attempting to bait their charges on that line or towards the outer edge of the arena, leaving you with the majority of the rest of the room to dodge. Whatever way you choose to do it, the concept remains the same. All players need to be on the lookout for where these mirages are charging and get out of the way immediately. Getting hit by a charging mirage will probably kill you, and if it doesn't, you'll have a damage down debuff that'll make you wish you were dead. At 50%, Blaster will jump away and 5 mirages will drop in the center of the room and begin to cast Mind Blast. This phase serves as a bit of a DPS check as all mirages need to be destroyed before their cast ends. Each of these casts will put up a damage down debuff, which you'll need to avoid to meet the enrage, so destroy these as soon as possible. Once all adds are destroyed, Blaster will return to its primary target and the next phase begins. Be sure to stun the next Mind Blast and get ready to reposition out of the way of the mines. This next set of mirages will tether to random players and will either be standing up with their arms in the air or crouched down ready to tackle the player. If you're tethered to a mirage with its hands up, you need to turn away. If you're tethered to a mirage that's crouching at you, face it like the true warrior of light you are. If you're not tethered at all, ignore everything and keep burning down the boss. Doing this mechanic wrong will again either kill you or place a damage down debuff if you survive. Moral of the story, do not mess up. At this point, the mechanics will repeat with another Mind Blast, another set of mines, into one last set of charging mirages. Blasters should be dying around this time. Up next, Brawler. This boss deals magic damage, so the tank without debuffs will be pulling him, while the other makes sure to avoid any magic attacks as necessary until their debuff falls off. This first phase is similar to normal mode, with his attachments denoting which attack is coming. We pull and tank Brawler in the center of the room, with a raid in line behind him. Brawler will place a stacking magic vulnerability debuff after each hand attack, and tanks will need to swap on the second application. On Savage, there are 4 possible attachment types. The first is the Single Buster, high tank damage that must be faced away from the raid and mitigated. The second is Double Buster, AoE damage that must be shared with the entire group by having the main tank turn the boss to point at the raid. The third is the Single Drill, which does proximity damage to a random player. All players must immediately run to the outer edge of the arena to avoid lethal damage. The fourth new attachment is the Double Drill, which will target the closest and furthest players to the boss with a spicy AoE attack that will push back and stun any nearby players. We have 2 assigned players to bait these explosions, one at the far edge of the arena and one within the boss's hitbox on a specific side. All other melee and tanks will stand on the opposite side, out of range of the incoming blast but still within range to attack. Brawler will also spawn steam chakrams throughout this phase that will slowly rotate around the room at fixed distances. A total of 3 will spawn, but it is possible to push the phase with less. Standing under these applies paralyze and deals damage. Players should always avoid these, especially during moments of high rate damage. This phase continues until Brawler reaches 0 HP, at which point he becomes invulnerable. He will remain in the middle and continue to throw out attachments and their respective mechanics. 4 waves of 3 different kinds of orbs will spawn around the room and slowly make their way to Brawler. Should they reach him, they'll do massive damage and will probably lead to a wipe. The first type of orb is the Alpha, which are small pink orbs that must be destroyed before they reach the middle. These can be stunned and slowed as necessary. The second type of orb is the Beta, which are large orbs that cannot be destroyed and will do high rate damage once they reach the middle. This damage must be healed and shielded through, and taking 2 of these blasts too close to one another can easily lead to a wipe. To deal with these, we let one naturally reach the center, while we slow and stun the other, staggering the times when they hit the middle. This gives healers enough time to top everyone off before the next massive hit. The third type of orb is the Green Gamma. These orbs need to be popped by the tanks before they reach the middle. They do high splash damage, so no other player should be around this area when they are popped. These orbs are spawning in waves while Brawler's attachment rotation continues. The single buster will be taken by the main tank towards the north with appropriate cooldowns. The double buster will be shared towards the south by the entire group. Anytime a single drill is out, players will have to move to the outer edge. The double drill will be handled by a healer who remains in the center of the arena the entire phase, and the main tank at the far edge. The off tank will run around and pop all green gamma orbs. DPS will split between the alphas, destroying them as quickly as possible, stunning where necessary. Lastly, remember to avoid all chakrams as they move around the room. Once all 4 waves of orbs are destroyed, the gate will unlock and you can move on to the third boss. The third boss is Swindler. As with normal mode, players will have to pay close attention to the height levels of the floor and their own debuffs. Remember, purple means stand on low, red means stand on high. If you do it wrong, you die. So don't do it wrong. The stacking circles are also more severe on Savage, and stacking the incorrect number of people will result in all of them dying. Again, don't do it wrong. There are 2 stacking circles, one that will target a tank and another that will target a healer. These circles can have anywhere from 2 to 4 orbs in them, denoting how many players need to be inside the circle. To deal with this, we have the affected players call out the number of orbs and have an order of players to collapse into the circles as necessary. These circles can also coincide with the height mechanic, so make sure you are on the correct elevation while also stacking in the circle as necessary. Bioarithmetics is an AoE blast that needs to be shielded and healed through. This will happen periodically throughout the fight, so healers be ready. The first set of adds will spawn shortly after and will swarm the main tank. These swarming adds will buff the boss. The more adds near him, the stronger the buff. The boss will also periodically do a large point blank green AoE that buffs and applies a hot on any adds near him. Lastly, the Heart Helm and Mind will also attempt to give their classic physical and magic vulnerability down debuffs once they spawn, but this can be easily avoided by stunning them. You can deal with these adds in one of 2 ways. The first is to simply have the main tank pop an immunity as the adds are swarming, then AoE limit break the adds down. The second involves the off tank provoking the boss and pulling him away from the adds to avoid all the buffs, while everyone else AoEs down those adds. This will allow you to save limit break 3 for the last mini boss. Either way works, so play to your group's strengths. More height, circles, and bioarithmetics to deal with than the second set of adds. This time, 4 Midas gunners will spawn in the north, east, south, and west. They attack every 10 seconds, and with each hit, they gain a stacking physical attack up buff. The longer they're up, the more damage they'll do and the higher chance of death. You'll need to split up all players to destroy these as quickly as possible to avoid anything past a second shot. Again, another height into circles, followed by back-to-back bioarithmetics to heal through until the boss is dead. Finally, we reach the last boss, Vortexer. This boss will hit the main tank with brute force, a high damage attack that also places a physical vulnerability stacking debuff. Tanks will need to swap at 2 stacks. The main mechanic of this encounter involves 2 elemental debuffs, compressed lightning and compressed water. These debuffs will explode after 20 seconds and pass to a random player within range. The compressed water explosion during the pass must be soaked by at least 4 players. Compressed lightning will only require 2 players to stack and swap the debuff. Anytime a player affected by either of these debuffs passes it to another player, player, they will receive a resistance down debuff for that element. This means they will not be able to take part in a debuff swap of the same element. If any player dies during a debuff swap, the debuffs will explode and wipe the raid. On top of all that, when compressed water explodes and passes to the next player, a water spout will spawn in the spot that original player was standing in. Standing too close to this water spout causes you to be affected by a drainage tether, which will knock you back and do high damage. That said, as soon as compressed water explodes and transfers, all players need to immediately move away from the water spout to avoid death. The best way to handle this is to have assigned stack-up areas for each debuff exchange. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's back up a bit. We pull the boss to a predetermined position with its back facing the area of our first water exchange and eventual water spout. The boss begins by casting Elemental Jammer, which applies compressed lightning and compressed water on 2 random players. The exact positioning of the following mechanics is very delicate, and I highly recommend using accurate waymarks to help players with spatial recognition. Next up, we bait the fire pools in predetermined spots, keeping them well out of the way of the next set of mechanics. At the same time, 1 tank, 1 healer, and 2 DPS will be affected by this red marker, signifying that they'll soon be hit with Fire Beam. These Fire Beams are line AoEs from the boss to the affected player, and should be spread appropriately to avoid deadly cleaves. All players should have a predetermined spread spot after each fire puddle bait to run to. Once the Fire Beams go out, players will have a few seconds to position for each debuff swap. The Lightning player will stack with the set player in their specific spot, while everyone else but the main tank stacks with the Water player, who will drop their first water spout in their specific spot. Once the explosions happen and the debuffs pass, everyone runs out away from the water spout, while 2 players will be affected by large AoE ice markers. These markers will be used to freeze the first water spout. However, since players cannot get too close to the water spout without getting hit by drainage and the knockback, they will be placed a little bit away from the water spout. Each ice puddle will grow once, and the goal is to have the ice grow into the water spout, freezing it without problem. If the water spout is not frozen at this time, it will explode and you will wipe. At this point, the next debuff swap will be happening. This time, the player with the water resist down debuff, aka the first player that had compressed water, will stack with the current compressed lightning debuff near the center of the room. Everyone else will stack for the water explosion and debuff pass. We place the second water spout counterclockwise to the ice block on the outer edge of the arena. Once these debuffs are passed, everyone will collapse back into the center of the room and stack on the main tank to bait the next set of fire pools. This will allow players to easily spread around the room with their fire beams. This second water spout must also be extinguished at this time with a fire beam. We have our healers handle this every time, and their spread out spot is in the direction of that second water spout. They position themselves in such a way that their fire beam hits the water spout, destroying it. Absolutely no one should be targeting their fire beams towards the frozen ice block. Assign these roles and positions as you see fit. Immediately after, Vortexer will cast Super Cyclone, which will knock back all players. This coincides with the next debuff swap, so all players need to ensure they are getting knocked back in the appropriate direction, as they will not have the time to run to a stack spot after the knockback. The water resist down player and the compressed lightning player should position themselves on the same side of the boss to be knocked back together. Everyone else will be knocked back in the other direction, dropping the water spout at the edge of the wall. For our group, this is the same location as the second water spout. Next up, Vortexer will begin to cast Ultra Flash, and all players must be behind the ice block at the end of this cast or they will die. Ultra Flash will also remove all ice and water from the platform and all player debuffs. He will then begin again by casting Elemental Jammer, and 2 new players will start the debuff exchange rotation. From this point on, the mechanics repeat until he's down or you die to enrage. And there you have it, all 4 robot friends down. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Up next, we'll head into Floor 3 Savage. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.